If they answered it was okay to do that, then they would have a problem with their own laws. On the Sabbath, if you'll remember the Ten Commandments, I think it is, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Now there was other rules in the Scripture, scriptural rules, that identified things that you could or couldn't do on the Sabbath. Work was one of them. In fact, your servants weren't even supposed to work. Gets us to who served this meal. But also, they spent a lot of time trying to decide exactly what that meant. But if we just go back to the original, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Would there be anything wrong with healing somebody that was seriously sick? Would that make this holy day not so unholy? So we've got to realize what they were dealing with. And they had come up with all kinds of rules. We have a problem with that ourselves in many ways. But is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? But they remained silent. So now he's already preempted them as far as what they could say back to him when he healed. So taking hold of the man, he healed him and sent him away. Now that sending him away kind of implies that he wasn't there to eat, whether he was there as a plant or there just to be healed on his own. We don't know, but he was sent away. I would think I would eat before I left, if in fact that was appropriate. Then he asked them, now this is the Pharisees and the scribes, if one of you has a son or an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath day, will you not immediately pull him out? Now, I think the King James says ass or an ox, but the translation is son in the better manuscripts, and it brings a stronger understanding of the obvious solution or the obvious answer to such a question. If your son falls into a well on the Sabbath, would you pull him out? Of course you would. Now, the Qumran, I'm trying to think of what they were called, but they had even stricter rules. Excuse me. They had stricter rules than even some of the Pharisees and scribes. Some rules said that if your ox was in a pit, now the pit was simply a word for a dry well, so it was a dry well. The translation well is accurate. But if an ox was fell into a well, then it was certainly okay to pull him out on the Sabbath. He could die. I mean, you didn't want to leave him in there very long. Some of the group that were a little more strict said, well, you can feed it, but you couldn't pull it out. Now, that's how picky they were with some of the rules on this. But you can feed it, maybe water it. I don't know if that was part of it. I'm going to have a problem with my throat. I apologize for that. But they were picky about some of these things, so understand that. So when he asked one of them, if one of you has a son or an ox that falls into the well on the Sabbath day, will you not immediately pull him out? And they had nothing to say. They couldn't really even defend their own thoughts on that, if you will, and didn't want to say anything. And I would guess because of the way Christ went around it, or went about it, that it prevented them from getting hyper as they had in other times, which we've seen in the last few weeks. But they had nothing to say. Now we go on to a different subject, if you will. This is they're at a banquet. He heals somebody. It's the last healing, a Sabbath day healing that's recorded. My guess is it was fairly common, but this is the last one recorded here. And then when he noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he told him this parable. Now, he's going into the banquet. The banquets were usually, they had pads on the floor. You sort of laid down almost in what we would think of when you dined in that day and time. And they would lay pads down, about 4 people maybe to a pad. And they were in a U shape. Those the owner or the host would sit at the bottom of the U as a head, and then the more important ones would be to his right, and the less important as you went up the U. It's a little hard for us to relate to something like that. I know we have potluck here, and I don't think anybody cares where anybody sits. It's not something that has a priority. But I was third vice president, second vice president, and first vice president of our state NARF organization. And we had an annual banquet. And it was, I mean, we had a head table set up a little higher than the rest of the hayus. And it was, I mean, you had a particular place. As third vice president, I was facing the thing. I was on the right side down at the far end. And Helen was with me. I mean, she was allowed to be up there. And then the second vice president, third vice president, I think the president, as I recall, and the main speaker, and so forth. And then they had the secretary. They had a place for everybody to sit. Now, I can't imagine it ever happening, but before everybody was seated, if somebody from the audience just decided, well, I can get a better view up here, I'll just sit up here. It wouldn't have worked. You know that there'd have been that had somebody say, oh, no, you need to sit down there. This seat is for whoever. So it's not unusual for us to do that. It's also in our political scenes. I'm sure as the heads of state visit the White House and so forth, that there's a particular protocol you have to go through. I recall, and I think you probably will too, of where the Israelite prime minister came, and the president had a chow with him and then just left. I mean, that is still a scandal in the news media. He just left. I mean, that wasn't the way to treat, apparently, a guest. And in this case, they had specific things. They were seated around this U-shaped banquet table, if you will. It wasn't a table as we know, but a U-shaped banquet. Just call it a U-shaped banquet. And it was specific where everybody sat. And I guess it was up to the host to decide who sat beside of him or her and how important they were. Almost always all hymns. But when someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor. For a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, give this man your seat. Now, if you can imagine the embarrassment of something like that, if you were sitting in the wrong place. Then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. Now, I'm assuming that if you're sitting in number 3 spot and the number 3 man comes in and they tell you to leave, you have to go all the way to the bottom. I don't know. I don't suppose everybody moves down one. But because it says, then you'll take the least important place. But when you are invited, take the lowest place. So that when your host comes, he will say to you, friend, move up to a better place. Now, most of us in social circumstances really have a recognition of that, if you will. Most of us, I don't think, walk in and take the most important spot. But there are those who, as they call narcissistic, they figure they are the most important no matter what the circumstances are, so they go take the most important place. Then you'll be honored in the presence of all your fellow guests, for everyone who exalts himself, and this is an important concept from Christ himself to you yourself. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. So we need to recognize that and, if you will, follow that as we do our own social